Here I have Ralph Towner's Improvisation and Performance Techniques for Classical and Acoustic Guitar by Ralph Towner. So this is published in 1985. I don't think this is in print. I wasn't able to find it. I used to have PDFs, but you know, like there's always one page missing and it's always the page you need that is missing. I think I mentioned that in a recent live stream I did, and somebody in the comments said, hey, I have this book, I'm not using it, I'll send it to you. So Daiki from Germany, thank you so much, very generous of you. The least I can do is to plug his channel here with some really good content. And you know, somebody said, I can't remember, some famous person said that if you have a good book, you should share it. So again, thank you. But if you're good at finding things online, you can probably find PDFs of this floating around. But I'm not sure if you can buy it. Let me know if you are able to purchase this where you are located. So I'll talk more about Ralph Towner and all this stuff, but as we go here, but I want to get into the content. But just for those of you who don't know, Ralph Towner is an American guitarist. For me, he's associated with the European record label ECM. He's released a lot of stuff and collaborated with other artists on that label. And as many of the biggest names on that label, even though it's a very European label and it's considered European sound, he's American. Like Keith Jarrett, Pat Metheny, and some of the biggest names, John Abercrombie. They're all Americans. Not all, but a lot of them, ironically, are Americans. And he's also very famous for playing with his group Oregon. So he plays jazz, I guess. Some of the ECM artists don't consider themselves as jazz musicians because it's not really swing, but he is an improvising musician and he plays with a classical sound, classical guitar and classical guitar technique that separates him from other jazz guitarists. And he also plays 12-string guitar. But this book is focusing on, as it said, performance techniques for classical and acoustic guitar. So this is for maybe you are a jazz player and you want to develop a better classical technique, or you could be a classical guitar player who are like looking to explore improvisation. So we'll take a look at all this, like who is this book for, what is the content, and all that. So let's get started, shall we? The first chapter is on damping technique and prepared arpeggio exercises. So we're gonna look at this hand here. Then we're gonna play this voicing. So it's a C, open B, and a G. He wants you to use a metronome. That's 60 beats per minute. That's it. So what he wants you to do is when you play that, you prepare your fingers, meaning you put your fingers on the strings so they're sitting there. Then you play the pattern. And when you play the next bass note, you put your fingers back so they're already in place for the next motion. So my fingers are getting ready for the next. That after a while that becomes a reflex. I'm just kind of, this is a no-brainer for classical guitar players, but if you are new to this kind of finger style, sort of like classical technique, it is might be something you have to look into, and you have to be aware of the names of the fingers, right? So numbers for this hand, 1, 2, 3, 4. And which is confusing for those who play piano, because I think piano players, the thumb is 1, but in guitar, the index finger is 1. And this hand is P-I-M-A. And in some cases they use the pinky and it's called D. So I guess it's the Latin or Italian or Spanish, I can never remember names for the fingers. So even if you never play classical guitar, if you're a guitarist, you should know these things. It's like basic common knowledge of the guitar. That's P-I-M-A, right? Then he wants you to play this. So it's like A minor 9. the idea here is that I'm not plucking every string. I'm putting these fingers like that, play the pattern, and then I'm putting them back. And only releasing the finger when it's time to play that note. And so the book does a good job of explaining all this if it's confusing. So here's a little exercise. Again, then just go up. Then we get into the kind of more strange sounds that I associate with Ralph Towner. He's not afraid of exploring like unusual harmonies. Just to make sure that we understand the difference between if I play every note. I'm talking about this hand now. That's not what he wants you to do. He wants you to do this. So I'm putting the fingers like that. I'm not saying you can't play like this, but it's more efficient, and if you especially want to play fast and you want balance, this technique is to be preferred, but it's something you have to kind of work on. Next chapter is polymetrical rhythmic grouping. So same kind of shape, but let's shift the rhythms of it. So we're actually gonna make it 16th note subdivisions as opposed to triplets, which we just played. Then you have this. So with the metronome. By the way, the reason I'm playing this guitar as opposed to my classical guitar, which would have been more appropriate, I guess, is that I could use my loop pedal. And I think sometimes he plays one of those Yamaha silent guitars. I've seen him play those. So in order to play these kind of things, which is kind of typical Ralph Towner, is you need these kind of big chords, open chords, or chords with a lot of open strings in them. And here he has a whole list of chord voicings where you can apply this finger pattern I just did. And of course you can shift to a different set of strings. So here's a little exercise. it sounds like Ralph Towner, he's been able to create this kind of musical universe. That's the thing that I kind of respect the most with certain musicians that are able to, or have been able to, create their own musical landscape. Like Alan Holdsworth is another one. It's like listening to them, you kind of enter their world. He's able to do that with taking full advantage of the guitar. So he's playing chords with a lot of open strings. And then he goes even further with his playing chords like this. So I'm playing F sharp, A, and then 2 open strings, which gives me this, right? That's a scale. Which gives me a cluster voicing, which would be impossible to play down here. I can only play this. Then you add the C on the bottom, and you get a Lydian chord. And then this A minor 11. Take the same pattern we did before. So it might sound like I'm doing more than I'm doing. I'm just playing, changing the bass note, changing a set of strings. Those are 4 chords, and not a lot of things going on here. Most of it is going on here. And these patterns create different kind of melodies inside the patterns. We're going to take a look at that some more here. Here's a really good exercise, accenting different fingers. This is actually kind of hard to do. So if I take this pattern I just played, if I play with a metronome, let's say I want to emphasize the clicks, that could actually be trickier than you might think. So I want to emphasize those. There's a little melody coming out, right? Not a very rhythmic melody, just the quarter notes. So if I take and emphasize an accent of, let's say, the index, we get this. Bear with me. Ba. I'm trying to emphasize or accent the index every time I play the index. Ba, 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 ba. That's it. If I bring out that. This is a very typical exercise that kind of a classical guitar player would work on, because they need to be able to bring out the melody, not necessarily always being on top. The melody could be inside the arpeggios and everything. So Ralph Towner, again, plays with a classical technique. I can't think of any other jazz guitar player that does that. I think, what's his name? There was a Brazilian, I think, guitar player, or somebody who played Brazilian music whose name escapes me, who played at least nylon string jazz, and it doesn't really work because the whole reason you invented the electric guitar was to compete with the other instruments in terms of volume. It's very difficult to mic a classical guitar with like a group with a drum kit and everything. It's just gonna feed back. That's why we have electric guitars. Now we have these kind of things, so you can do it, but it doesn't sound like a proper classical guitar. Some classical guitar players hate these guitars because it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like a classical guitar. It's almost like it's got its own thing. This is almost its own instrument. I love these Godin's guitars, and now you have all kinds of models. Cordoba, I've developed something, Ibanez, and it's quite popular. And then the Yamaha silent guitars. Somebody who is famous for playing these guitars would be Sylvain Luc, who passed away unfortunately recently. Lionel Luiki I don't see him play them as much anymore, but he used to play these guitars. They're kind of also associated with world music. So again, classical guitar in jazz is not that common. Then you have the Brazilian thing where it's like an overlap. Brazilian guitar is classical music, but it's also improvised sometimes. But if you don't count the Brazilian guitar players, it's hard to find jazz players who play with a classical technique. So please comment below if you can think of more. There are, however, classical guitar or jazz players who know how to play classical guitar. Oh yeah, I just thought of one. Wolfgang Multiac. Wolfgang Multiac plays with a proper classical technique. It's got a great sound. I mean, he must be, would imagine he's a classical trained. Adam Rogers, the jazz guitarist, actually has a degree in classical guitar, but I've never heard him play classical guitar. I've heard some jazz players like Kurt Rosenwinkel. I've heard him play Bach, and he can do it. He plays proper the fugues and everything, which is not easy to do, but he doesn't sound like a classical guitar player. And I'm, because he doesn't play with that tone and everything. So Ralph Towner, you could play his music as a classical guitar player. So this book, for example, that I'm working on some of this stuff, this is Solo Guitar Works Volume 2. This is something a classical guitar player who never improvises would pick up and play. So he's part of the classical repertoire. But I've never heard Ralph Towner play actual classical guitar like Tarraga or Villalobos. So maybe he has, I don't know. I've never heard it. The problem with this is that you don't know when he's improvising and when it's composed, because you might see a piece in here and say, yeah, I want to play this, but then you listen to it and it's like completely different after a while, or there might be several recordings of it. So I guess that's a sign of how good of an improviser he is, that you can't tell when he's improvising and when he's playing composed stuff. But for me, it would be nice to know where he's improvising and not. On a side note, if you want to learn more about the ECM label and Pat Metheny's ECM years, I have this book I can recommend. It's called The ECM Years. Pat Metheny, The ECM Years, 1975 to 1984. Because I guess most of you are aware of that. Pat Metheny's first records were released on ECM. Then I think Bill Frisell was kind of supposed to, he replaced Pat Metheny as the ECM kind of guitarist. Another American working in Europe with ECM. Okay, so now then he takes this pattern and shifts the rhythm more. So the pattern we just played, I'm gonna use the metronome so you get the idea. You can shift the rhythm, of course. If I take a simple pattern like P-A-M-I, P-A-M-I, and play this chord, A, C, D, B, E, sounds like this, right? 16th notes. Let's say I want to shift the pattern. It would sound like this. I just started a 16th note later. Or even one more. Or I could shift it up a 16th notes. Then he does the same thing with the triplets. Then I shift that with a triplet, like an 8th note triplet. And all this is very clearly explained and laid out in the book. Then he just also talks about the variation of these chords you could play instead of playing. You could play C sharp. Get some kind of F sharp 5 with the 13th. I tend not to think about the chords, the label of the chord, like I just think of them as sounds. Could be F sharp. So as always, there's a lot of stuff that I'm just kind of moving forward here. I'm not mentioning. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not mentioning. It would be impossible to cover everything here. Then you could take 5-note groupings. Let's see, what is this? A, P, M, I, P. That's a quintuplet. If I take that pattern and play that as 16th notes, I get something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Here's another exercise. It's kind of tricky. I was struggling with this before. Goes against the or over the bar line. Let me try to play this with a loop. So you get this melody. Coming out in the arpeggios or the arpeggiated chords. Then there's a harmony to this. confusing, right? Because we're not playing in the way we're used to it. When you're playing up here and using open strings, the things are not in the same order that you're used to, if you know what I mean. So yeah, so I'm creating different arpeggiated patterns that bring out like a syncopated melody is what he's doing there. Then instead of playing one at a time, you can play like several notes at the same time, like so I'm grabbing two notes at the same time. Playing E at 9, then I go into E minor 9 without letting go of those two fingers. And that could be a little bit awkward. Then you can edit, and he calls it thin out, like a thinned out version of what I just played. Latin styles pattern with this technique obviously as well, and there's a lot of that stuff. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. Then there's a whole list of these types of chords that involves all the strings, like B minor with a flat 6 and an open 11 with an A on the bottom. These are kind of Ralph Towner sounding. It's like I'm using the top open strings, and then an A flat, or there's a whole bunch of these. Would be a very Ralph Towner sounding chord, like a B open triad to open strings. Then chordal plucking is the next chapter. Let's say I take this E minor 11 or E minor 9, I guess it is. You can play like this. So 8 notes on the top, 16 notes combine. I can look at all those chords on the previous page I just talked about. And then there's a whole bunch of variations on that, and working on playing them staccato or try to play them long and different patterns. Then he talks about melodic playing. I'm skipping that now. Some scales and all of that. One thing he talks a lot about is the idea of using open strings in your lines as well. That's another thing I think of when I think of Ralph Towner. He does like... We'll play from a note to an open string, or two notes. Again, taking advantage of the guitar, right? That's a kind of a typical Ralph Towner melody right there. Then even more chords, big chords here. Then he talks about like combining chords and to kind of improvise in the melodies. So you've heard me play, if you follow my channel, you have heard me play some of his tunes. I got a playlist with Ralph Towner tunes. And here is a first tune, and this one I have made a video a few years ago. It's called Innocenti, and it's from a Ralph Towner and Gary Burton record, I think. So here we have this chord E minor 9. And this C major Lydian. Minor. And then C sharp. Here's only the melody. And then it's displaced. Using pull-offs and hammer-ons. You create this kind of vibe, and you're bringing out a lot from the guitar, which I love that. To be honest, this kind of music is probably the music I enjoy the most. If I could pick one kind of style of guitar playing for the rest of my life, I could only play that, I would probably play Ralph Towner music. And if I could play in a Ralph Towner cover band, a tribute band or something, I don't know. Then there's another tune called Vessel, you might have heard. I think, yeah, it's also from the Gary Burton. This one you might have heard. It's for some reason I find it extremely difficult to play, I don't know why. This is so weird. And then there's some more. This is very interesting and difficult to play. Here's another tune called Serenade, which starts with a chord melody type thing. so hard to play. Definitely have to work on this some more if I were to perform this. But then you play the chords and solo over them. The chords are slightly different for the soloing. So you have the scales written out and for each chord and different voicings. So there are obviously no tabs or anything like that in this book. If you're looking for tabs, the Ralph Towner is definitely not for you. I just find this to be a very fresh, different approach. If you feel like you're practicing your bebop heads too much and your Charlie Parker licks, nothing wrong with that. You know that I think one should practice that, but this is very different. There are no licks here. There are no jazz language even. It's just playing the scales and the sound. It can be, I find, a fresh way to look at the guitar, the role of the guitar in improvised music. Then we have left hand exercises, which is like kind of normal classical exercises. This kind of stuff. For that stuff, there are other books you can get. So the primarily, what I'm getting from this book is not this. It's the tunes and the kind of I don't know, look into his way of thinking about music and all the voicings and the tunes and the techniques. So if you work on that stuff, you can actually play like, not as good as him necessarily, but you can understand how he plays. By the way, he's still playing. I think even that group Oregon might be still playing, even though one of the members died early on in an accident when they were actually on tour. But I think they might even still be around. And I think at this date when I'm making the video, I think Ralph Towner is 83 years old. So that's quite inspiring to, you should never stop learning. And he released a solo album on ECM not too long ago, like maybe last year. And I can really recommend ECM podcast. They have their own podcast when they talk to the artists when they're releasing new stuff. And there's an interview with him. I think it's on YouTube. I'll see if I can find it and I'll put it in the description below. It's very interesting to hear him talk about his career. Some more typical classical guitar exercises. And there's a tune here. It gets into more difficult arpeggios. This is a tune called Zephyr. I have no idea what that means. And then there's this chord. So I'm playing the A, the E, open D, C, open B, E. And this pattern. Let me see if I can play it right. So there I'm just playing thumb, P, I, M, P, I, M. And on the back, way back, it's a little bit trickier. With the metronome, so you get the idea. Then we have a whole bunch of very interesting chords that you can apply to this pattern. Let me see. So that gives, like, that's a, according to this, it's a D minor, major 7, 6/9 over A. Yeah, it gets kind of ridiculous. It's better to just think of it as a shape. This reminds me of like a classical guitar, like Villalobos, like these two. Tunes where you just play an arpeggiated pattern, or this one. Leo Brouwer, right? So there's an overlap here between the jazz world and the classical guitar. There's a melody to this Zephyr, and then there's the Juggler Etude, which is another kind of tricky tune. Oh yeah, this is a very good exercise. The pattern I just played with this hand applied to a pattern with this hand. So again, this is, I need to really work on this stuff. This is great. It talks about scales and the theory of improvisation, and I wouldn't, modes and stuff, I wouldn't go to this book for this information. There are other books so better for that, but it's nice to have things in the same place, I guess. Here's the tune that I also recorded, one of my favorite Ralph Towner tunes, called Beneath an Evening Sky. It's gorgeous. I'll play a little bit from it. I've recorded this tune before, but I'll just play a little, like the intro. The melody goes like this. That's a great melody. Goes into something else. It changes there, but yeah, beautiful tune. Then there's the scales that goes with those chords that you can practice improvisation. Then there's a tune called Along the Way, which is even harder to play. Yeah, it's not a whole lot. This book is kind of, it's just like a booklet really, 80 pages. it's what's great about it is that it's so different from any other jazz guitar books, because it's for classical guitar. So that was my little overview over the music of Ralph Towner and his book Improvisation and Performance Techniques for Classical and Acoustic Guitar. And I hope you find some of this information useful, and I want to thank you for your time and attention. I shall see you next time.